I'm going to keep this short because we don't have much time for what Mike wants to show, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Mike.
Wow, that was fast. You're seeing the screen okay, Fred? It's no blank screen. Okay, there we go. We always just try to mention this at the beginning that if you get your GoToWebinar stuff up and you can't see the full screen or you want to get to fit, you got that zoom button there in the upper left to get it to fit. There should be a questions field where you can throw stuff at us because, you know, we can't hear you talking right now. So just throw it in the questions. We'll try to answer them at the end. And let's go. I was talking to Fred about a week and a half ago about topics to do here, and I said, why don't we do the MergeXP tool? And you might say, why would you want to do a whole webinar on the MergeXP tool? We could probably do 4 or 5 hours just on this tool. Basically, the strength and power of the tool is that, you know, I just put that as an example. Maybe you could replace 3 or 4 other tools. I mean, I got one workflow I did where I probably threw out 10 tools because of this. And what does it do? It allows you to dynamically build pages or files on the file based on metadata or different variables. And once you play with MergeXP, it's pretty much limited by your imagination. And pulling in multiple files, and you'll see what case here where we'll actually bring in a form and fill it out with data as it goes through. You can do simple imposition schemes, or if you're you know, you really want to go for the gusto, you can do a really full-blown imposition in here, but I would not suggest it as a substitute for commercial packages like preps or something like that. We'll go over a workflow that a lot of people run, but maybe I think a lot of folks have inherited this workflow, this one where you overlay a grid for proofing. So I think there's a lot of users who use that workflow but don't really understand how it works. And if you are one of those people who does understand how it works, don't take that as an insult. And people who are familiar with the MergeXP tool, hopefully you might see a few new things or something you didn't know. So one thing that you have to understand about the MergeXP tool when you dive into it, before you do anything else and before you get any wild ideas about what you may or may not want to accomplish, is the basic notion of attachments. Attachments is something that you'll see in many Dalim tools. You'll see it in the Create Pages tool. You'll see it in obviously the MergeXP tool, the Merge tool. And it has to do with how you reference objects one to another. Because if you're building a file on the fly, you have to be able to tell things where to go, you know, how to get positioned, and the basic sequence when you're building up the MergeXP tool is, and you'll see it here, define an object, object number 1 or object number 2. And there's different types of objects, and you assign all sorts of attributes to it, as you can see in that list. You attach that object, the new one, to an existing object in the page. And this will make more sense when we start looking at the GUI. And you use what's called attachment points to locate or position these things in the page. And then using an option called translate, you can kind of offset and move them around the page. And again, that just sounds like a bunch of whole mumbo jumbo, but at the most basic, that's what you have to do as you build up the tool. Make an object, tell it what it is, stick it in the page somewhere based on a reference to an existing object, and then either let it sit where it falls or kind of move it or offset it, and repeat, and do that over and over and over again. So there's the MergeXP tool, and it's all set up. And you know, if you look at that and you haven't worked with a tool before, you go, "What in creation is this thing?" I mean, and you'll see the type of things I was just talking about. You'll see there's 9 objects, there's different types, and there's all this other stuff. But that doesn't mean anything, at least just to have that thing thrown in your face. So let's look at their setup. object is basically your base, okay? So you always have to start from object, kind of lays down a foundation for your page. So what this is, if you look at the object type, it's a page. So this is basically our incoming page. So he comes in, and there he sits. So we've now basically laid down our foundation. Object number 2 is a box. Okay, we're going to make a rectangle. You'll see the width and height is defined. But now we get to that notion that I talked about earlier in terms of referencing it to something, because once that base object is defined, we have to start building things up. So you see object 2 is anchored or is referencing object number 1. Okay, so he's object number 1, we'll call him his key, right, or his anchor. If we hit this button here now, though, this is where we tell it where he's supposed to go. And this is a window you'll become very familiar with in the tool. So what that little icon tells us, the green box represents object 2, our box, and that gray behind it is the object we're referencing to. So we're telling object 2 to snap his bottom left to the bottom left of his anchor object, or object 1. So when that rectangle is created, boom, it's going to pop in there at the lower left. So we've just created an object. I mean, we're experts now in the MergeXP tool. Look at object number 3. Object number 3 is going to be a piece of text. And notice in the field immediately to the right of it, we're not just typing in some static information. This is a variable within Twist. In this case, it's the name of the workflow. So you can see how when we fill this stuff out, we can insert and inject specific metadata or Twist table information that's extracted. And I should have mentioned, if you go all the way to the right, or the anchor of object 3, notice it says -1. -1 is a way to tell it to reference to the previous object. The reason that's handy sometimes is you may have, 10, 11, 12 objects in here, and you don't want to have to constantly say, oh, the previous one was 11 or the previous one is 12. So if you know you want to reference the previous object, you hit -1. And in this case, we want the slug of text to snap his bottom left to the bottom right of that orange box, right? So that text is going to pop in here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you don't always want things to just always snap and align exactly with an existing object. Maybe you want to offset it from there. So how do we do that? You hit this setup button. And when you hit that, this pops up, and then you know you're in for some fun. Now, these are all sorts of other attributes that can be assigned to an object. This thing called translation is an offset. XY dimensions. So what I'm saying is, after that object snaps bottom left to lower right of the other guy, move 10 millimeters to the right. If we want him to move up, the 0 is the Y dimension, and we could move them around in that way. So if we were really running a workflow, in fact, that workflow, what would we end up with? Let's get a file and throw it through. What we should end up with is the base page, a little square in the bottom right, and hopefully some text. There's our file. There it is. So you say, oh my goodness, that text is quite large. I mean, why would we want to do that? So if you go back into the tool, object 3 is the text. Here's where you get into all these different types of things you want to change. And the text objects are pretty common in MergeXP. We want the point size to be 8 point, and let's say we want it to be magenta too, because we need to liven things up around here. Save it. Let's get that same file, run it again. The other thing you'll notice is that I'm throwing a PDF directly in there. I'm not doing any sort of conversion, so MergeXP will handle a PDF natively. There's my smaller text, we colored it, so you can see how once you've placed and defined objects, you can then start going into the setup thing to change the attributes. Next workflow I want to show is one I mentioned earlier. This is one that is used pretty commonly. And before I even mention, I'm going to throw a file through it. I'm going to grab this file. I'm going to throw it through this. This is bleed safety marks on it by dynamically identifying the trim box. The other thing you'll see happening here is this is actually an 8-page PDF. Back in the day, old school MergeXP people knew you could not throw a multi-page PDF into the tool, but you'll notice that took the entire file, handled the whole thing, and you can see now, whoops, let's try that again. That it laid down that colored grid on the files, right? Blue is the trim, the yellow is bleed based on 1/8 inch out, and 1/4 inch safety is that magenta or reddish line. So how did we do that? And again, I'm going to give this fairly short shrift in the sense that if we go over every possible button in there, we will be here forever. Here's a key thing to remember in any of these workflows, especially if you're trying to work with page geometry. Before you hit MergeXP, you should put a file check tool in. The reason you want to do this is you want Twist to read through the file and gather up as much information about the page geometry for this file, because that guy we just pushed through, if we look at the log for that guy, we have to know this kind of information in order to get MergeXP to do our bidding. Trim box width, for instance, right? That guy there. Trim box height, and you got all this margin information, which in Dalim lingo typically gives you bleed information as well. So you need to have that stuff yanked out by a file check tool first. So what did we do? We opened the wrong workflow. Here's what we can do. We'll look at this guy. Just as with that sample workflow we did earlier, object 1 is the incoming page. He's the base. He gets laid down. Object 2, 3, and 4 are just boxes, right? This is the one that defines trim. We snap him to the top left of the incoming page. And here's where we get into the fun stuff. This is where you, again, have to gather that information. What we're doing is we're offsetting. This is basically the distance from media box to trim. So we push this object in from the left, and this is the distance from the top of the media box to trim. So we go in and down, and we make a box that is trim box width, trim box height. That's the size of our file.
Mike, can you show the tooltip to the right on the info that shows the kind of format it's expecting?
Yep. Well, you'll see that when the translation just says that it wants an X and a Y. A window, when you're defining a window in this way, the X and the Y, again, I just told it to go 0, 0, snap to top left, and then there's the height and the width. And again, height and width in this case are defined by variables. Stroke color, and again, I won't get too deep into this, but the way you define a stroke is with a width, and there's those different options for how you can make those little dashed lines if you want those things to be in there. Notice he references object 1. So basically, we've laid down trim box line already. If we want bleed, notice what we're going to do. We're going to reference this box to the trim box. We're going to center it. So the center of this box is right on the center of the trim box. And since he's for bleed, and we know bleed is 1/8 of an inch, all we have to tell it is make this box trim plus 1/4, right? Because it's 1/8 inch on each side. Height exactly the same. Trim height plus a quarter, again, 1/8 on each side because it's centered. Same thing with safety, but instead, right, we're centering on the trim box again. Notice he references object 2, which is trim, and all we do there is we shrink the box to drop them on. I'm going to show you a variation on that now. This is something that may be a little esoteric, I'm not sure. This is not.
You're breaking up there a little bit, Mike.
Okay, any better or worse?
That sounds better right now.
Okay, this is the same trim bleed safety workflow. One thing that's different in here though, and this really only applies if you're submitting multi-page PDFs, there's these newer options in here that have been here for maybe a year or two, where you can treat odd pages and even pages differently. So what I did here, and let me find the resulting file and you'll see what happened. Notice for the odd pages, it put the page number on the right and the file name on the left. For the even pages, it put the folio on the left, file name on the right, and you'll see those are going to alternate as I go through. This is for a real use case. The only one I could think of is if you were going to folio a bunch of pages and had a very consistent scheme for how to do that, right? But when you see that odd even stuff in there, that's specifically what that is for. And you see, in addition to all that stuff, we still got our marks dropping in on there. This next one I'm going to show you is a notion I saw at a customer several years ago. What these guys did was, let me find this. They had a form. In fact, this is just a little 6x4 card. And what they did is whenever they processed a file, they would gather some information about it. You know, they have their little logo and all that stuff in it, put a preview of the file and drop some other information. And it was a very quick reference sheet or card that they had for jobs that had processed. In fact, I think they actually emailed these to their customers to show what they were up to. Now, this one is just one of my own simplistic, dopey forms, but I think you'll get the idea. So here's what you want to have happen. First, you want to find the workflow. There, that guy. Notice one thing that this guy is doing. I think you saw earlier that I was using this option called page, but notice this other option called URL. If you have a static file that is stored on your file system, you can reference that file and pull that in. So in this case, the base for our MergeXP here is not the actual page, it's that form. So that PDF form is laid down as the foundation for what we want to do. And then from there, you'll see some of the text is captured from get mem statements, the channel names. We're going to drop the date in here. This is a variable that's going to be fed from WebLink. This is variable fed from WebLink. And you'll see we're doing something similar down here like we did in the MergeXP, except in this case, we want to gather trim and trim information, media box information, and drop that into our form. So let's run a file and see what it does. Let's get that out of the way. And this is one that I have set so we should drive it from WebLink because there's a variable I want to enter in here. We'll say what's our job number is just that ridiculous number. And I'm going to throw 2 files in here, and then I'll show you afterwards why. Let's see, we want that file, and I guess that one's as good as any other. Tear open. And you can see those things are already finished. Notice what we get. Again, like I said, this is fairly simplistic, but there's our trim media box information. It captures all this information, drops it on the form. Another thing you'll notice, though, is you notice I got two kind of different results here, right? Notice on this one, the information's over on the left, and this is kind of a wide page. This one is a tall page, and we put the information over on the right. That's because since this card that we're making is quite small, like I said, it's only 4 by 6, every file that comes into it pretty much is going to have to get scaled to fit in there. And the way you scale things in here, let me find this, you'll notice this guy is our page, right? In MergeXP, you'll notice I'm laying down a box here. This box is, basically this is, again, something I kind of measured out. So I knew that I had a space in there that I wanted to fit a portrait page in. So what this setup does is, notice where it says size link 2. 2 means I'm going to reference object number 2, and I'm going to scale to him. So he determines how big my page is going to be. And the other thing I'm using is, you'll notice this thing that says 5. 5 is, there's a reference sheet that I should have pulled up, but it's it's something maybe we should provide notes for. It's instructions on how the DPL to PGS language works. I'll leave it simply, though, that option 5 means to get best fit. So if best fit is tall, it'll scale it based on height. If best fit is width, it'll scale it based on width. And what I did in this workflow, because I kind of cheated, let's get this thing out of the way, is I detected the orientation of the page when it comes in. And that's something that file check does. So if it was landscape, I ran one routine in MergeXP. If it's portrait, I ran a different routine. So that's why I could get the scaling to work differently. Because for landscape, it references a box that's wide. For portrait, it references a box that's tall. And that's how it gives us those two different results. The other thing to keep in mind for this kind of workflow, whenever you're working with one of these things, it will take you a bit of work to work out all the offset information so your text falls in the right places. I mean, this is not something where I just popped in a couple numbers and everything worked. I mean, if you look at what's going on with all these text boxes, right, you'll see each one of them has these different translation values in them, because, you know, you got to figure out first what's a good reference object to attach to, and then figure out the right offset so those things fall into place on that form, so that if you nail that thing on your first try, you are really good. And it's not uncommon to actually print out the form and get out a ruler and measure where you want things to drop. Okay, there's one important concept I want to go over. I want to make sure I get the right workflow for it. I think it's this one. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, if you look at this workflow, all this is, you'll see there's 4 objects, and each one of them references the incoming page. So one thing to be aware of is you can have an object repeated many, many times. So really all that's happening here is just like a step and repeat, right? Base object, object number 1 is the page. This guy, his top left is the bottom right. So basically we've got the page on top of itself, right? Object 3, you'll notice his bottom left is the bottom right of object 2. So now we've got 2 down and 1 over, right? And this guy, he goes on the top of object 3. So we basically got 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, right? So let's run this. And let's see, one of these files should do. We'll go with this one. to show you something that's bad. And the reason I'm showing it is it's not an uncommon thing to do when you first start. So I'm looking for a 4-up, right? What did I get? I got 1 page. So I supposedly know MergeXP. Why did I get that? There must be something wrong. And here's the thing to be aware of. When you're throwing all these different objects in here and you're building things up, there has to be a notion of how big the final page is going to be. This icon here, or this icon here, or any of these, if I click that, I'm basically telling the tool my final size of my page is determined by this object, right? And we know he's just like an 8.5 by 11 page. So I can have all sorts of fun, you know, attaching these guys and making what in my mind is a 4-up. But, and those were probably created, but they're clipped because the page size is determined by this guy. So what, in almost all cases, there's obviously exceptions. If you want the page to dynamically grow to accommodate all the objects that are in the page, you need to select this option out here. So down in the output area, page size is determined here. And what that does is as objects are added, MergeXP automatically, dynamically grows and sizes the page to accommodate any additional objects that are coming in. So let's run that exact same file through the same workflow. There he is. That was the grow workflow. And lo and behold, we now have 4-up head-to-head on these files. Next question might be, how did you rotate those pages? Again, if you go into Setup, Rotation, and you'll notice that where it says 4 there. 4 is, if we are familiar with our attachment scheme, there are 9 points on here. Point 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I say rotate 180 and I say object 4, I'm basically saying pivot off the center. That's why it spun it around and basically plopped it right in place. Again, it's something you may not know off the top of your head. It takes a little practice. I think Fred mentioned earlier, though, that it's good to hover over those things and it gives you an idea of what you're up to. The angle and the ref is the reference point that you want to pivot off of.
And very important to remember to count from 0 instead of 1, or you'll try to figure out why you're not getting it where you want.
I know I shouldn't do this, but I will. I'm pretty sure that there's, yeah, right here. In the help file, there actually is a nice diagram that shows exactly what we're talking about. So these are the reference points for where you want to pivot to rotate an object. Okay, I had, where's that other one? This guy. This is another kind of imposition routine. What I'm throwing in is a multi-page PDF. This is a 4-page PDF, right? Throw it on this guy. There's a couple things to point out here. Notice we have 4 files, and we're going to see them all disappear and combine together. That's 4 separate files in, 1 file out. That's the 4-up workflow right here. So notice, again, these are 4 completely different pages that are slotted in. And I just did something kind of cheesy, but I put in the center marks and the bleed marks on the top and the bottom. This is where you get into the importance of working with, wrong workflow, working with regular expressions. Because if you're working with different types of pages, you want to be able to assign the appropriate page or page number to the right object, right? So I'm basically looking at page numbers here. Object 1 is page 1, 2, 3, 4. So the field here is entered with information that will key off of the regular expression here, so it knows which file to put in. Notice also those trim marks are based on an object called line. Let's say we decided, you know, I would like to put like register marks, like on center, left and right. We'll just do something like that real quick. See if I can not screw it up. You'll notice these are all the different types of objects that you can work with. I can say I want a register mark. You tell it how big you want it to be. I'll say 3 millimeters. That's the width, 0.3 millimeters, let's say. Just like any other object, he's got to be anchored. This tool will sometimes tick you off because you can't get it to resize. Now, there we go. So I want to anchor him to object number 2. And where do I want him to be? I'm going to take, I know I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to take his middle and put it on the top left of page 2. And again, notice this is an instance where he's kind of outside the current boundaries of the page. So this is one of those cases where MergeXP will have to dynamically grow it to put it in. The chances are good I screwed that up. So why fail twice? I'll just put one on the left and we'll see if it works. Same file, train schedule, go.
Yeah, I can say having worked with MergeXP that it's definitely the tool with the most trial and error of most tools.
It's the tool that will force you to start drawing diagrams. Look at that, I got it. Actually, another thing I should have pointed out there is obviously you want the color of that thing to be set correctly. You will see this often on objects dealing with color bars and that kind of stuff, is this thing called channel reference. What you want to do is tell it which page or which object that comes in do I want to use as my reference for, you know, what colors or what color channels are in place. So don't forget him, especially if you're doing a color bar option, this guy. There's 2 other ones I want to show you real quickly. This one I may not even explain. I just think it's one of the coolest implementations of MergeXP I've seen over the years. And I can't even, oh, that guy. Very logically and very well thought out, I think. And you'll see why when it comes out. This is a workflow that was put together by a customer. I wish I'd thought of it, but I didn't. And what he wanted to do is make a file for proofing that would show for them the page, the 4 separations, and the 3 color. And you'll see that's pretty much all that's in it. So again, this is a case where all you're really doing is referencing the same file over again. It's basically dropped on a base that's a white page. And you'll notice that each one of these pages has different scaling factors. This is the main page, right? 66%. And there's this channel mixing stuff. So this is basically keeping the magenta channel, scaled different percentages. So you go through, you're basically putting the same object in many times, but attaching them to different areas and changing the attributes. So it's quite powerful what you can do with that guy. I probably should stop here. I think, in fact, what I'll do is I'll start running this other workflow, but we could start fielding questions because this is going to run 88 pages through a workflow and make reader spreads out of it. But it's probably better that we start discussing or answering any questions, and we'll let that thing run.
We'll let you go.
And maybe I'll show you some of the results of it. Yeah, because what this one does as well is
Well, I think you dropped off, Mike. You there?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, I was just going to say that. Go ahead.
No, I was going to tell you the last thing we heard is what this thing does is. So go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say what this thing does is it makes readers spreads, but one of the key things about it is you have to have the ability to chop the bleed off the center, so you butt the two pages together. And we used to do that, at least the workflow that I've traditionally seen this done with. It's done often with the create pages, and then you feed the chop pages into MergeXP. This one just does the whole thing. You'll see there's really no create pages in here. Everything's done in MergeXP, as opposed to this old school guy that kind of took a whole bunch of other tools to do it. And if you see what's popping out of here, I can get some of this over. What's this thing called right there? It butts the pages, and it's able to grab the trim information. I dropped on that blue trim box on there for us as well. So that's, and don't be alarmed by that white line you see. That's not really there. That's just Apple Preview. So we get the center marks on there. We get the trim box, and we got a nice set of reader spreads busted out from one multi-page PDF.
All right, let's go ahead and, since we're already at 22, we'll go ahead and answer the questions. You've already kind of covered a couple of questions that got sent, page size and how to set that and stuff. So one that I got for you is overriding values with set param for MARI. Can it be done? And if so, how do you figure out what goes where?
Well, what goes where depends on where you want it to go. But set param for MARI, indeed, you'll see in this tool right here. I was creating these. This is some page number information. These are variables that were called inside of the tool. Any variable that's generated in this tool, if you're going to use, let's say you're working with text, right? I don't care what the variable is. Get variables something, whatever it is. In this case, as a text field, it'll just throw it in there. That's how we got this stuff right here. So I can find it real quick. I closed it. The one from the form. That stuff. Some of that came from set param from MARI, or they're just get mem statements.
I think the question's probably more specific to like overriding the page width and page height that you're trying to make. So using set param from MARI to override a MergeXP specific option, like width and height.
Sure. I mean, you would probably have to use. That's probably. I know who sent that question.
Yeah, what you got to do is go ahead and set that to like 2 and 3. Just yeah.
Well,
now what you want to do. Now what you want to do is go ahead and look at the
what you have to do is find out the attribute in the param file that you want to change right there. So you would override those in set param for MARI. Let's say that's size X and size Y. So if you had a
for
set frame from
MergeXP.
RE, yeah, you would kind of go in here, and you would say, if I can find it.
This is always fun to find, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, wherever it is in there, size, there it is, size X, right? And then, you know, maybe that was the value, right? Maybe it was some variable you pulled, so that's not going to override that size for you.
Yep, I think that covers it.
There's one other thing I want to mention. This is not all that recent. I mean, it's this button here that says master. Master is an important one if you want to deal with maintain metadata and output intent. So if you're working with multiple PDFs, you can define one of them as the master, and the final file will use the metadata from that file to insert into the final file and the output intent.
You must be reading the questions I have, because I covered one of them as well.
Oh, all right.
And the last question I think we'll cover, since we're almost at a quarter till, is a quick explanation of the color settings next to the item in MergeXP. I think they're talking about the little color boxes.
Yeah.
Go ahead and open the tool.
Let's see. Yeah, there was one. Yeah, this is the one where I should have done it. In fact, this is the one that did all those different colored separations. So if we look at this one here, this is done old school way, right? Where I said I want to keep the cyan and get rid of the others. What I could have done is I could have done this. I could have said keep cyan and set the others. Actually, it's probably easy if you set them all to transparent and then say just keep the cyan. So that's how you can manipulate the channels from within the GUI.
Yep, and I think that covers it.
Okay.
You got anything else real quick, Mike?
It'll just confuse. Oh, I should just mention this, because I've done this in every workflow I run today, is that guy, keep PDF. So if you're just going to run PDF straight through and don't want to renormalize through the output PDF tool or go through the PS check tool either, every one of these examples I ran today were just PDFs straight through the tool. So that's another one.
On object merge as well, because I think that one can be important sometimes.
Well, object merge is actually not the same as object merge in the other tools. If you're putting a native PDF directly in here, you should always use this option under setup. It's called element to embed. What element to embed does is, instead of making what Dalim refers to as a fill page, in other words, making a box and just throwing a PDF in it, it takes the file, and the objects themselves within the PDF are embedded in the page. So you don't have a bunch of still PDFs in here, and it basically gives you much more consistent results. This object merge thing is something different that was used to be used if you were blending or working with separations, I believe, but it's been so long since I used it, I don't really remember. But just to confuse people, I was just going to say, to confuse people, object merge in MergeXP does not mean the same thing as object merge when you see it in this tool.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
Mike, great job covering that tool in the short time we had. Thanks everybody for attending today. I hope you got a lot out of that. As usual, we are recording the session, and we'll post it on our YouTube channel, as well as the link that will come out in the thank you email tomorrow. You can always go to our events webpage on the Blanchard.com website to look at a list of the upcoming webinars.